what do you think is the most justified criticism of Curtis, and what do you think is the most unjustified?
I'll start by saying the intrusion into the sacred. I showed two examples, there are probably 50, where today we would think, maybe not, or you want explicit permission before you do this. Of course, he was especially interested in the sacred because he had been told that Native people don't really have sacred traditions. They're quite private about these things, and so he wanted to prove to his critics at the Smithsonian and at Columbia University and elsewhere that they were wrong. And so he went out of his way to do that, and he thought that this was the spiritual element of indigenous people was, in some sense, the most interesting, and so he pressed for that. At the time, that did not seem controversial. It does today.
Thank you.
When I was giving my talk, I gave those three criticisms of Curtis, and I can blink the first two away. But the third one, where the dressing up, using these the different regalia and headpieces, I should say, in my studio, I've never provided. I knew about this criticism of Curtis before I started, so I never provide a piece of regalia. I never provide. And there's plenty of these as gifts that have been given to my studio. You come into my studio, it's actually on Google as a museum in North Dakota. But every once in a while I'll have a Native American walk out of my changing room, grab something off the wall or something and wants it in the picture, and I promptly have to take it from them and explain to them the integrity part of this. So the only part that I couldn't really justify as much from Curtis, if I'm going to be critical of him, is he didn't have to use those outfits across different tribes. Is the only thing that I can come up with. So,
and I have to agree with both my colleagues here. I think the intrusion portion, especially in those areas of sacredness, because natives are extremely suspicious and they like to keep their spirituality it's a little different because we didn't have the church until the missionaries came in. So their spirituality dealt with the earth, the wind, the water, the land. And so that intrusion of him forcing them to do things is, to me, a little reprehensible. And I also agree with the dress. Now, I know that in the lower 48 that certain people are allowed to wear a headdress, but you have to earn it. It's just like Queen Elizabeth and her crown. I'm not going to go and grab her crown and wear it and have a picture taken. So, to me, that was encroaching on someone's hierarchy of their value. So,
if I can just follow up from what she said, I happened to have the honor of taking a photograph of Ernie LaPointe, the great-grandson at Sitting Bull, 135 years after Orlando Scott Goff took a photograph of Sitting Bull in Bismarck, North Dakota, in the same process. And when Ernie came into my studio, and Ernie's a rather important photograph for me because the photograph, he titled it, it's called Eternal Field, and he had come into my studio and he wore a talisman around his neck, and he explained this talisman protected him from my lens. So the tradition carried forward many, many years, and he knew he was coming in. He knew about the photograph, the first photograph of Sitting Bull ever taken in my hometown by Orlando Scott Goff. Goff paid him, by the way, $50, which is an equivalent of about $2,000 in today's money. The Bismarck Tribune recorded it as a 52-second exposure. So Goff had to Sitting Bull had to hold still for 52 seconds. Sitting Bull sat in the chair, took his $50. Goff had one shot, one exposure. Sitting Bull stood up and walked out the door. But these traditions and him being superstitious of the white man carried through to even 2014 when I took that first photograph.
Thank you. Clay, you study many historic figures. What drew you to Curtis?
So I've done a lot of work for the Seattle Public Library system over the years, and when his 150th birthday came, they asked me if I would come and portray Edward Curtis. They wanted me to go to 15 or 20 locations around Seattle, including their big town hall where there are 1,000 people, and to be Edward Curtis. And I said no. I've done a lot of characters, Jefferson and Meriwether Lewis and Theodore Roosevelt and J. Robert Oppenheimer and so on and so forth. But I didn't want to do Curtis because I wanted to talk about him and not be him. This was at a time when the Northwest was in a very angry mood about Curtis. And I didn't want to be just on the defensive hour after hour for the perceived license that he took with Native peoples. And I thought I could bring more insight to the story from the outside in. And so that's what I did. And then, of course, the minute you start to look at his work, everyone has seen a few Curtis photos, but when you start to dig in, as you must have done with this project, you become more and more enamored of the beauty of the photographs, the soul, that somehow he captures the soul of the people many of the people that he's photographing. There's a certain magical quality to Curtis that I don't see in other photographers of Native Americans. And there's also, I think, and that's what troubles me a lot about the too much criticism of Curtis. I want to wrestle those critiques and to complicate them and to be true to them. At the same time, his achievement is so massive, so extraordinary, that it can't be done again. It couldn't have been done by anybody else. And we need to honor that. And every one of the photographs was also a negotiation. So he would turn up, let's say, on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. He might not take his first photograph for 3 or 4 weeks, and he would haul wood and haul water and help put up and take down lodges and help to herd horses and do whatever other work was required of him to observe the culture and to ingratiate himself and to build credibility and trust. And then when the people would come in, he would have to say, would you come tomorrow for a photograph? And there might be resistance, and this could be a long process. The patience that he showed is truly remarkable. So often when white people go to the reservations, even now, they come in, want something, and leave. There's a taking. There's always a taking. Extraction. And Native people, and of course there's no monolith of Native people, but generally speaking, indigenous people resent that kind of jump in, jump out, get what you want, and go put it on a wall somewhere, as they should. And Curtis knew that, and so he worked hard to earn trust. So when I got into it, I realized 2 things. First of all, you can never get to the bottom of Curtis. And secondly, this project that I'm doing of videotaping elders talking about Curtis is going to add so much value to the photographs. I'll just give you one example. So Gerard Baker, this extraordinary Hidatsa that I've worked with, was looking at a Mandan woman with a bull boat. A bull boat is sort of a trough-like boat made of willows, and buffalo robes are stretched across it. He was looking at it, and he deconstructed that photograph, what she was wearing, her ornamentation, the nature of the bull's hide, how many of these bull boats she had to make before she could own one, what her duty was to the rest of the women in the clan in making these. He said things that no white person could ever have generated, him or herself. He explained the photograph in a really rich way, and if that is now next to that photograph on a QR code and someone sees the video of that, that not only gives the exhibit validity, but it helps everyone understand that these aren't just photographs. These are ethnographic captures of a whole way of life and at a time of enormous transition. So I can't get enough of it. I just am looking now for people who want to support this great project, because I think that this is the future of Curtis studies.
Yeah. Thank you for expanding on some of that, because I was going to ask you those questions later. But that kind of brings me to a question for you, Dr. Ross. Do you feel that Curtis's photographs of the Alaskan Native communities that he visited capture the essence of the community? And with that, do you think that there's anything that he missed or that you wish he had documented?
I think he captured it rather well. Life in the village is still going on, very similar to what it was back then in the early 1900s. We still hunt primarily subsistence. We live off the land. It would have been nice if he had written just a little more on the context of what was. I know he wrote about what was going on, but I don't think that he really dug into the meat of things. I mean, it was more superficial, and I think it was because I don't know if I can't speculate why, but I'm sure he had a lot to do. But
He was cold.
frozen words. But it would have been nice had he been a little bit more articulate in some of the photos, the context of what was going on. I think that would have been more helpful for those that have never been to Alaska.
Thank you. Shane, this is something that I've been interested in personally for a while, and so I'm going to present this question to you. But I'm often, I read a lot of Curtis' archives and his letters and things that he was talking about in articles. And I'm often struck by how often he is not talking about photography. So he's talking about his financial hardships and more the ethnographical side of the work. So to me, I interpret this as the photography almost came easily to him. I think he very clearly just had an artistic eye and talent. But on the other end of that, I know that that photography is this blend of science, mechanics, and art. So my question, I guess, is how much do you think that, what he did was from sheer talent and how much from discipline?
Well, first of all, I think his camera is nothing more than an instrument. So we don't slight authors for not talking about their pen, or painters for, not talking about their brushes and canvas. So for him, it was a tool for him to be able to do the job that he thought he wanted to do. As a photographer, I'll do anything for the shot. Like I'll do jumping jacks before, stand on my head, do whatever I need to do to get the shot. It's all about the shot. And I see that a lot in his work, is that he was just focused on and getting that image at any cost. And he paid a high price, the bankruptcies, divorce, ridicule. He paid the cost. So I just think, he was a master printer. I mean, he was, in the darkroom, he could, like you talked during your talk, that he could take a negative that was just anyone else would have tossed, and he was able to work with that and elicit an image from that at all cost. And I think he paid a high cost for what he's given us, and that's why I've seen these critics of Curtis, and we can be critics of his too. I mean, I have problems with some of the things, but at the end of the day, you have to put yourself in his shoes and see what he had to endure to get what he did do. And I think the world is a better place for his images. And there's no question, there's no question about his talent and what he had natural talents when it came to a camera. And I think when it comes naturally to you, more than it was just what he did, and he just did the best he could.
Thank you. This is for all of you. There were so many photographers working in a similar way at the same time that Curtis was. But today, Curtis is, I would say, arguably the most well-known and exhibited. And so why do you think that is? What is it about Curtis's work specifically that continues to resonate and influence people today?
I'll start out. I think because when you look at the pictures, there is like a connection to the soul. There's something soulful about all the pictures that not a lot of photographers can capture. And I think that's why.
I couldn't agree more that I call it a kind of a magic, but I sometimes say in lectures that I give, if you gave me $1 million and a team and all the best equipment in the world and said, go take pictures, 40,000 photographs of native peoples, I might have a handful of really extraordinary portraits, but most of them would be just good. You see this all the time. Many other photographers of Native Americans have taken really nice photographs, but there's some kind of connection that seems to be missing, and Curtis had it. And part of it is, and here's where I really want to congratulate you, Caitlin, on the exhibit, because you're not just doing it chronologically, you're talking about different phases of his career, modernist and pictorialist, and he was part of an artistic tradition of photography that we sometimes forget, that he needs to be compared to other photographers who were working without native subjects, like Stieglitz and others, who were doing this extraordinary work at the time. And he was part of a kind of a zeitgeist of how art and photography were mingling at the beginning of the century. And you've done such a good job of showing the different phases of that here. I think that's really, really important. So he was more than just a photographer, where someone like Fisk is basically just a photographer, a good one, but he's not doing quite the same thing. And so the mystery for me, and why I keep coming back to it, is that Curtis could somehow negotiate across the language barrier and across other enormous barriers to these very poor people at this moment of just extraordinary transition, and somehow get a trust level with them. But you saw in that picture where you see the backdrop, the way he then goes into the darkroom. A lot of Curtis is the darkroom and not the photograph. And so we think of Photoshop today, but he's doing things that require extraordinary chemical uses of light that you don't get at Walmart. You only get when you really work at that at a very deep level of devotion. And I think that somehow that level of trust shows through in 5 out of 8 of his photographs, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. The word trust is really important here. He garnered the trust of these people. And I think another word that's very important is he was embedded, that he just didn't show up and spent a couple hours and left. And that's the difference between his work and mine, is that my Native Americans have agency. My friends, they come to me, and Curtis had to go to them. And I think it was that going to them and being embedded in their community and in their culture for so long. I'd have to think that they identified him as someone that they could trust.
That segues into a question I was going to ask you later, but since you just brought it up anyway, you carefully record a lot of biographical information about the people in your portraits and so on. And so in what ways do you think that your approach is similar to Curtis, but also how is it different?
I really consider myself just a photographer, a documentary historian. I've been asked many times by people there's been hundreds of articles written about my work, asking me to give narratives or recanting some kind of oral history that was shared to me, and I've always said no to that. I feel that my expertise, or if I can give myself that, is making the image. I let the image speak for itself, and then what I capture. Other than that, I don't write any narratives. Occasionally, I'll grab my iPhone and do a recording of the person talking, but I capture the date the portrait was taken, my plate number, so they're all chronological. I know every plate I've ever made and the number that I'm on. I capture a date of birth. I capture their English name, how we know them in the modern world, and then if they have a Native American name, I capture that. And then at the bottom of each picture, it says, by Shane Balkowitsch, Nostalgic Glass Wet Plate Studio, Bismarck, North Dakota. So you have all the information that you need to know who and what and where and when. But I really leave it up to the subject to write their own history. I've taken photographs, I've taken some controversial photographs, and it's not for me to write the history, it's for me to capture that person. I recently took a photograph of Leonard Peltier, who can be a controversial figure. He's spent 49 years in federal prison for killing 2 federal agents. Maybe. A very good friend of mine to this day. But that photograph was controversial. It's not for me to write the history of Mr. Peltier. It's for Mr. Peltier to write that history. It's for me to document Mr. Peltier in some kind of photograph. So we have, can you about imagine, I use this, I know this is a very strong example and I'm getting a little long-winded, but can you imagine if we didn't have photographs of Adolf Hitler? I've always thought that we should pay a little bit of gratitude to the photographers that photographed Adolf Hitler, because we had this evil in the world that we know happened. And if we didn't have a face to attach to that, how that wouldn't be good. So I think everyone deserves to have their photograph taken, for good or for bad. And someone can come into my studio and I can take their photograph, and then they could do something heinous years later that has no reflection on me as the photographer. That's on them. And someone can come into my studio and do something remarkable in their life, and that's for them to make those things. So the real big difference here is Curtis did an amazing job doing a lot of narratives, and he composed music from listening to the music, and he did all these recordings. I really don't do any of that. I capture the photograph and I capture who the person's name is, and then I just let history make itself.
Thank you. That was fascinating. In the exhibition, we're really focusing on how Curtis, putting him in context with the art movements, essentially, of the time. But I wanted to make sure that there was some area in the exhibition for people to reflect on some of the controversies and complexities that we've been talking about today. And in that reflection area, Dr. Ross, I'm going to ask you what the prompt that we ask in the exhibition, which is, do you feel that Curtis's photographs can perpetuate stereotypes, and how might they affect our present day perspective of Native American peoples?
I think every individual has a certain preconceived notion or perception of something, and whether that will change or not, I can't say. But when you look at the photographs, I look at something that is part of history, and I don't add to it, and I don't take anything away from it. And I try not to be too judgmental. And that's one of the values in Inupiaq, is that we try not to judge. And very difficult at times, remaining completely unbiased, especially in difficult times. But, all I can say is that, yeah, there is, I would say, probably with people not in the United States, they automatically think that there's cowboys and Indians still living here.
Defensive.
Or they automatically think that I live in an ice igloo. And I said, an igloo is just a house. Do you live in an igloo? Yes, I do. Don't you? Mine might be made of ice during ice fishing, but what is yours made out of? Oh, yeah, cement, bricks. Okay. But anyway, it really all depends on the individual. But I think those preconceived notions, some people are not going to change, but some people are moved by the pictures. And I hope that they gain a better understanding of this land belongs to the natives.
I'd like to address that just for a moment, if I could. So let's just say that Curtis had done the other, that he had taken 40,000 photographs of indigenous people in the moment of transition. So they're wearing blue jeans, or they're wearing cloth caps, or white person's calico, and so on. That would be a really extraordinary record. But then we would say to it, I wonder what it was like before white domination in Indian country? What was it like when their lifeways were more intact? What happened to Curtis is that he was taking a bunch of pictures, mostly of Mount Rainier and landscapes in the Pacific Northwest. He was a famous studio photographer, the most important in Seattle, and he could have made a huge living and just lived as one of the prominent citizens of Seattle, chose not to. And he went out at the invitation of George Bird Grinnell in 1900 to the Piegan reservation, the Blackfeet reservation in northwestern Montana, for the last Sundance before they were banned forever. You have a photograph of it upstairs, and he took a photograph of this line of 50 or 60 lodges in a row, and he had an actual, and you mentioned this in your excellent interpretation, he had a conversion experience like St. Paul on the road to Damascus, and he said, this is what I'm going to do. It's not too late. They still have this. They still have a traditional lifeway. There are still parts of these cultures that are intact that haven't been colonialized yet. Yes, they're in transition, but they still have it, and they have the clothing, they have the ornamentation, they have the headdresses and the shawls, they have lodges, they have children's toys. I'm going to go out and get that before it's too late. It seems to me that the whole world wants this, that one of the greatest stories ever is the story of the indigenous people of North America. If you go to Europe, they're just a thirst for it. And for him to have captured this a little late in the game and with a little bit of manipulation here and there is world-class ethnography. And if he had done the opposite, we would have this dearth of these traditional cultures. We are so deeply fortunate for what he did. We have to factor in the things we don't particularly like about him now. But 100 years from now, there will be a completely different way of looking at this, I think.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. I do want to leave time for some Q&A. So this is going to be my last question for each of you. I think it's a fun one, maybe. I think about this all the time. But if you could ask Curtis one question, what would it be?
Are you serious with this question?
I know. I don't know what my answer would be, even though I think about it a lot.
If I could ask him one question, I don't know if I could ask him one question, but as a fellow photographer, if we can take it out of the verbal, okay? If I could do one thing in my life, it would just to go back one day, like one day with him, maybe just in the plains, maybe down to see the Sioux, okay, the Hunkpapa, maybe just when he was visiting there, I could just showed up on my horse and just like shadowed him, like just been his apprentice and got the water that he needed or mixed the developer that he needed or whatever he needed, or, get a sandwich for him. It wouldn't matter. So I don't know that I would, I'm a visual guy. So you're asking me about verbiage.
That's a great answer.
But you're asking me about verbiage, which is the spoken word. And I have already explained that I'm very visual, and I've been like this my entire life. And it took me 44 years to find this. I didn't have a camera until I was 44 years of age. If I could just shadow that man for just one day and just see him work his camera and carry his camera and get the plate out and just do anything that he needed on that day, that would be what I would do.
The question that I would ask him, and let me explain why first, is that I'm a firm believer that marriage is a partnership. My husband and I have been together for almost 48 years. And I would ask him, why didn't you ask your wife to go with you?
Oh, he did.
Valid.
Did he?
Did he ask?
Clara went with him twice, once into the Hopi land and once in South Dakota, and both were disasters. Just absolute disasters. And then the second one, they're on the Pine Ridge, their son Hal almost died of diphtheria or something, and they had to stop the train and send to Chicago, and his wife said, never again. That's it. So twice that she went out, and it was just so rough out there, just so uncivilized, so un-Seattle, that she said never.
It's a weak little thing.
It's a weak little thing. Caitlin, my question would be, I have 30 questions, but my question would be, were there really 40,000 dry glass plates? I'm guessing it's more like 18,000, but still, were they really? And then the story is that during this horrible divorce, I mean, just front page banner headline divorce at a time when that was a scandal and a shame, the story is that she was going to get the entire property, which she did. And the story is that he and one of his daughters went across the street and smashed the glass plates on the concrete to avoid his wife getting them. I want to know how many plates they actually smashed. And because we don't have the glass plates, and we would give anything to have 10, 50, or 100 of them. Is it really true that they would destroy all this intellectual property in the name of a marriage that broke down? So he could clarify that.
Thank you.
Never again.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to you all. Thank you so much for hanging out with us this afternoon. So please, yes, raise your hand. Are we going to do
One back there. Can you get a mic? Thank you.
First hand was
Sure.
I don't like microphones. Can everybody hear me?
They need it for the sound.
Oh, okay. I never can modulate my voice correctly for a microphone. Thank you all for your remarks and sharing all your experience with us today.
Hey ho, hey ho.
It was really interesting. I learned a lot. What I bring to today is like 25 years of teaching American Indian Studies and talking about Curtis on occasion. And so in class, I don't valorize or villainize him, but I talk about him as an expression of something that was going on at the time. And you guys have touched on it with the Vanishing Indian. And what I talk about is how he participated in that, because he vanished, his photographs in a sense vanished them from modern life by his erasure of like the clock or somebody's wristwatch or somebody's eyeglasses, things like that, when he asked him to take that off because that's not Indian enough, etc. So I talk about that in class. Not so much he was a bad guy, but where does that urge come from to define, well, that's not Indian enough? That what makes a calico dress not a native calico dress? As soon as a native woman puts it on, it can become a native calico dress. Jingle dresses, 20th century production, right, of that meeting of the colonized and the native, right? So we talk about that, but less so much about him, but just more like the bigger trends at the time. And so what I sometimes show in class, and this is like my question, are you aware of the work of Richard Throssell? Crow photographer. So he took images of some of the same people that Curtis did. And so I show Curtis's images of a man named Bull Tongue and Richard Throssell's image of a man named Bull Tongue. And Richard Throssell's image, Bull Tongue's got his button-down shirt on and his cowboy bandana, because that was his life, right? He came in and had a picture of his life, and then Edward Curtis like puts him back into the past. And so that's not Edward Curtis's fault necessarily, but I think some of the criticism of Curtis come from native communities, and so they have to be heard. They can't be dismissed as like, well, experts was in scare quotes on one slide. Now, some of those are native people making those criticisms, so they have to be heard, right? And the other thing is when I show Curtis's photographs, I show a short film, it's on YouTube by Ryan Redcorn, called Smiling Indians. And that's all it is for several minutes, babies, grandmas, couples, teenagers, Indians laughing, Indians smiling. And so I talk to my students about why isn't that part of the popular culture's knowledge of Native people is sense of humor is really important. And Native people laugh a lot. If you go hang out in a Native community, you hear a lot of laughter. And so the image of the dignified Indian, the stoic Indian, is perhaps too dominant in the popular imagination. So just those two questions, like Richard Throssell, you can find him online, Crow photographer, about the same time as Edward Curtis, and Ryan Redcorn. He has a couple of bit parts in Reservation Dogs, if you've watched Reservation Dogs. He's Sterling Harjo's friend of all those guys who made that. Just a short film called Smiling Indians. And it's really sweet and really short. So,
Well, surely there's room for both approaches, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I would like to address a little bit of the misconception, again, as a photographer. These are long exposures. When these Native Americans come into my studio, it's a 10-second exposure. I have a head brace and everything that holds them in place. They're So I think you're getting a little confused when there's a little confusion. During Curtis with dry plates, it was a much faster photographic process. We were getting these exposure times down to a second or even under a second, okay? But in the wet plate process, and a lot of, remember, these frontier photographers sending these photographs back from the frontier in the 1800s. So this is before Curtis. And these were long exposures. Like I said, the Sitting Bull had to sit still for 52 seconds. Nobody, you're not capturing, and I get an entire lecture from my college students on this. Nobody's standing there smiling for 52 seconds. You look like a maniacal serial killer. So there's a big misconception about the smiling. It's not that natives weren't smiling. It wasn't that they were hungry. They were enduring very long exposures, and these photographers knew in order to get the focus of these longer exposures, you had to hold completely still. And smiles, candid smiles, even though they can be very beautiful, they're very quick. And when you're talking about a 20 or 30 second exposure, nobody can smile. I've tried this in my studio. Nobody can smile for 30 seconds. So very, very seldom will we ever see a smile on these older processes because of the exposure time.
It's not, for instance, the bird is not showing smiling in yet. The domination of the images in the author and age that those took up all the air in the room wherever that's.
We've clearly privileged the stoic Native American. That's part of the culture, and it's been in place from the beginning. If you go back to Thomas Jefferson and Logan's speech and the speeches that were recorded in this time, they're all of the stoic indigenous person. And so this tradition continues to this day, and you're saying that it's more complex than that. Of course, absolutely it is.
He says, got her own mic.
Yeah.
I have my own mic. Thank you. Yeah. Well, for the most part, I think Alaska Natives, especially the Eskimos, we laugh a lot. If you go down to the lower part of Alaska, the Aleuts, they cry a lot. Cry. And the Tlingit Haida, forget it. No, if I see a Tlingit Haida woman coming towards me, and you have to remember I'm also a martial artist, I go the other way. I'll cross the street because those Tlingit Haida women are mean. Yeah. But for the most part, we all have our areas of times where we smile and laugh. And I don't know about you, but I think I'd rather laugh. But I'm a proud Native woman, so there are times, like in the picture at the beginning of my PowerPoint with me, with my my parka on, is I was asked for a photograph, and I won't smile. It's just standard, because I have to show that I'm a serious doctor here, right?
Great picture.
Yeah.
In Edward Curtis's efforts to fund his work, you mentioned that he came east and he would put on the magic lantern shows. And I would like to know if you can share more with us about that event, and especially how those efforts were perceived and received by the public in the East.
Yeah, I had more slides of it. It's really an amazing part of what he did. He tried so many different ways to fund his work, and none of them panned out. So he would do these, what he called picture operas, including beginning at Carnegie. And he would have, this is pretty cheesy by our standards, but he'd have these colorized slides and 2 projectors, so he could do back and forth, and fades and so on. And then he had he'd have a tree, a couple of pine trees, fake pine trees, and a lodge on the stage. And then he'd have natives come out and do hunting tableaus and other tableaus that were very common at the time. He hired a really extraordinary composer who specialized in indigenous music to produce the music. And then he would show the slides and do narration. And these were beloved. I mean, they got rave reviews everywhere he went. But after he had done all the hiring of all of the hall and all of the musicians and everything else, he lost money on every single one of them. And then he decided to make the first feature film of American Indians, Native Americans, called In the Land of the Headhunters, and he spent a fortune on it. had costumes made. This is how he put it. I had other artifacts designed and masks and so on, and had an all-native cast, and produced this extraordinary film. It lost thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. All of his entrepreneurial work failed, just disastrously. His most success was selling individual portraits of Native Americans from his studio in Seattle, but he ran through J.P. Morgan's money almost overnight, and he lived hand to mouth. I mean, he literally was borrowing from all of his friends until they told him never to contact him again about money. And so the fact that he was able to persevere and finish this thing is almost unbelievable. And just one last thing about that, In the Land of the Headhunters is very well regarded today. A little cheesy in places, but still. But the year after, Nanook of the North came out, and it swept his film off the stage, and no one thinks about Curtis's film, where everyone praises Nanook of the North.
Wait.
Thank you.
A couple up here.
That's a good question. No? T-shirt. And Justin?
You have a question?
I do.
I just have a quick question for Clay. I was interested in your project that you're working on now. You mentioned it earlier about the commentary by the elders.
Right.
When would we get a chance to, or is it going to be a book or a video, or when could we
When will you
see
see
it?
this? Well, we've begun. We've done 6 or 7 interviews in Montana and South Dakota, and we're going to concentrate on the plains first and then the Southwest. We need money, frankly. So if you've got, an oil well that you're not
I'm
using,
sorry.
just see me afterwards.
Not me.
But we're actively doing it, and we hope that within a year or so we'll have an active website with some of the modules that have already been produced and so on. So you'll see it in soon, but we have probably 5 hard summers worth of work to do to complete it. And one of the trips will be to Alaska. Just to go back to what you said about Alaska, why he was less in depth in his ethnography. He was tired, he was old, he was broke, and his team had left him. So he had a really extraordinary team. They finally went on to other lives, and so he was alone with his daughter Beth, and so the ethnography is not as deep as it would have been if he'd had his full team in place. But you can look for this in the next couple of years, and if you have, $10,000 sitting around, please see me at the end of this
So
program.
what is the end product going to be? Is it a
It will be a
video?
documentary in the end of different elders talking about all this, but there will be these modules you can look at 90 seconds, 5 minutes, 12 minutes, an hour and a half sort of
Will I
thing.
be able to see it on YouTube?
Yes, you will on YouTube.
Great. My friend here has a question.
Thank you for your wonderful presentations. I wanted to know whether Curtis's work as an artist informed other artists of the era. I was very taken by the photograph in Canyon de Chelly with the horseman coming across, which is nearly identical to a Maynard Dixon painting. Very similar compositionally and subject matter. Maynard Dixon painted at about the same time, era-wise. And I wondered whether there was cross-pollination between artists that were working at that time.
Certainly Dixon, but the Canyon de Chelly country has that effect on artists. Caitlin, you address that because you're the expert on this subject.
In short, yes, absolutely. I think Curtis was, I would put him at the top, somewhere at the top, most influential artist of the 20th century. I mean, even today, contemporary artists are still reflecting on his work and using his work, even if it's in a tongue-in-cheek way. And in the exhibition, you can see other artists that were probably, I kind of argue that they were probably inspired by him as well.
I have a question for Shane. Do you know if Edward Curtis has ever tried tintype as a method of photography to document Native Americans?
Yeah, that's one of the things that separates his work and my work. If you would have asked Edward Curtis in 1902 or whatever, are you going to be making wet plates? He would have scoffed at that, I would believe, because it had already been abandoned 20 years prior to that. So I don't believe that we have any amber types or tin types. So I'm an amber typist, like I said in my talk. That's on glass.
I am so impressed with all of your efforts to really open up about Edward Curtis, in spite of the current criticisms, which I think I'm a docent here at the James, and we have heard countless information, which is accurate, about the current really academic, scholarly criticisms of Edward Curtis. My question to you is, you're here today, you're doing all kinds of work back in North Dakota and Alaska with different organizations. Is there any plan to do something nationally, maybe work with Ken Burns to do on Edward Curtis? Because this is great, but it's a drop. And right now, I think, as in my life, what I hear about Edward Curtis, and we've had several exhibits of his here because of the Huff's donation to the James Museum. And I think the current thing, and I thought Clay was really right on when he showed a slide of he asked AI about Edward Curtis. And it came up that Edward Curtis really contrived and reconstructed the reality of the Native Americans. So that's where we're at with Edward Curtis now. Like you said, maybe in 50 years it'll be different. But I'd love to see all of you, but especially Clay, because our Ernest introduced you as a Ken Burns-like individual. And I thought
I was lucky to be in a Ken Burns film. It's a huge difference. But I take your point.
But I just write him a letter.
Well, he doesn't take my calls. But I'll tell you this, I'm going to be in the Henry David Thoreau 3-hour, 3-part Ken Burns documentary at the end of March. So, I'm riding high, and I'm going to be with him on the 24th of March in Boston for a panel like this on the Thoreau film. So I will say the good people of St. Petersburg are insisting that there be. I don't think he's going to do it. I don't think that that's his cup of tea, but you're right. We need a major documentary about the life and work of Edward Curtis. This is the time that it should be done. It would help to clarify all of this. It could be done for $250,000 or less. I'd be thrilled to do it, of course, or to be a part of it. The work that we're doing, I think, is going to make a big difference, but I can't do this alone, obviously, and I'm not young enough to do 40 years out there. But I want to build a team and a foundation that can do this elders work because I think it's that important. But I do think that you're right that the current view of Curtis is a largely iffy and negative one, and that has to be combated. And so we go back and forth about this. I think we have to face these questions, and if we don't face them, it's worse. So we face them honestly, and we admit where there is an issue, and we are not protective of him, and yet we don't throw him under any buses either. And I think that's exactly what the humanities bring to this, that a family foundation can't, or others. And so I just want to say again how impressed I am by the exhibit that Caitlin and Ernest and others put together here, because it's along the right path. And so 250K, I'll call Ken. This will be my 7th Ken Burns film. And I'll give you this one little last piece of Ken Burns. On my second time with Ken Burns, I was in the Jefferson film, and then the National Parks, and then the Theodore Roosevelt, and so on. And about the second time, he said, "You want to be in my films? Stick the landing." In other words, say what you're going to say and stop. But, I'm a historian, so we say, and another thing, and another thing, and another thing. He said, "I can't edit that. You got to stop. You got to stick the landing." So I've been practicing ever since, and I will never learn it.
It's obvious.
Two more, maybe.
You bet.
So great that you hung in there.
You guys are very patient. Thank you.
What do you think?
How are you? How are you?
Thank you very much. And I just have a quick question. Was there any push by the political establishment during the time not to have his photographs like in public or in any way having people access them? Because there's a lot of discussion about the denial of them even existing at some time.
Just one quick thing about that. So there wasn't any forbidding of the showing or the distribution of the photographs, but he was heavily discouraged from doing it at all. The Smithsonian refused to sign on, refused to buy even a subscription to the series, which is appalling. And Franz Boas of Columbia, the nation's first great ethnographer, denounced Curtis because he said he was uncredentialed. And so there's the snobbishness of the academic academy. We see it over and over and over again. He had to fight this all of his life, but no one stopped him from showing what he had done. But when he went to many reservations, the agent said, "You're not allowed here. You're breaking the law. We don't want you here. You're just going to encourage them to go back to their old ways and to cling to their dead cultures. We want you gone by tomorrow." And the agents cooperated with the missionaries and sometimes with the government of the United States itself to try to prevent Curtis from doing this work. So he persevered against some pretty great odds. That's why he clung like a tick to Theodore Roosevelt, because Roosevelt said, "This is important work, and you're going to do it, and I'm going to protect you."
I think Alaska is just a little bit different because we only have one reservation in Alaska, and that's Metlakatla. The natives were free to roam until till the pipeline came in, and we had to sue for our land because they weren't going to allow the natives to have a place. But in my mind, I'm thinking, and this is just an assumption, is that during that era when Curtis was roaming around taking pictures, thankfully he had my cousin, but because he was well versed in English. I believe he went to the Chemawa Indian School in Oregon. But I'm sure a lot of the Caucasians and Europeans and some of the Russians there thought, "Oh, a crazy man taking photographs. He's just nuts. We have gold." So there were other things going on. But we were actually free. He was free to roam the state of Alaska because it was a territory.
Wow.
Okay, we have time for one more question. It'll be yours, if I can get to you.
Did he ever make up with his brother? Because I think he didn't credit him.
He never made up with his brother. That's another loss. Well, this happened early. Aesel was his brother, and Aesel was a gifted photographer and a partner in the firm. And then there was the Harriman expedition into Alaska, and that's really important for Curtis's development in all sorts of ways. But his brother went to the gold fields in the Klondike and took thousands of photographs, and Curtis appropriated them as Edward Curtis photographs, and Aesel never forgave him for that. And at the funeral of their mother, they didn't even talk to each other. But one important bit about that, when he went on the Harriman expedition, which was in this kind of world-class group of celebrities and writers and photographers and ethnographers and rich people, they went to a village on Vancouver Island, and it was not abandoned, but the natives had gone elsewhere for the season, and the Harriman people just stripped it clean. They took all the totem poles and dismantled the houses and took everything. And Curtis was so appalled by that. He said, "This is the actual dwelling place of a group of natives. How dare we loot this place?" And so he decided, "I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to be that guy. I'm never going to be the person who comes in and just extracts from Native people. So that reaction really set his character and gave him the integrity that he had through his entire life. It was an appalling theft by Harriman and others of a working village that just happened not to be inhabited at that moment.
And the reason why is because it all depends on the season, because we live off the land. So we subsist. And so if it's fishing, we go fishing. And if we need to hunt, then we're going to travel. It's like my grandfather and grandmother always being on the trail, going where there's food or where they can help others. So, and I think it was horrific that the Harriman expedition did that, because they destroyed somebody's camp.
And sacred totems?
Yes, and sacred totems, which they all tell a story.
So he didn't know about it, or
He watched it happen, but he was not in charge of the expedition. And so that Harriman and his people did this, and Curtis kept saying, "What? We can't be doing this." But of course, he didn't have a voice. This is complex stuff, isn't it?
All right. Well, I hate for us to end it on kind of a negative note, but I guess it's on brand with Curtis, right? We kind of were looking at him as a tragic character, so it's good to end it on kind of a downer. Just kidding. Thank you so very much for all coming, making time in your busy schedules to speak with us.